March 14, 1980, USS Poseidon, beneath the Arctic ice cap. It's cold, penetrating cold. The kind of cold that seeps through a nuclear submarine's hull, despite its sophisticated insulation. The air tastes metallic, recycled through scrubbers 1,000 times. Condensation forms on bulkheads and drips with metronomic precision. Sonar stations glow green in the dim combat information center, illuminating the tense faces of operators who haven't seen daylight in 73 days. Inside the cramped advanced sonar analysis compartment of America's most sophisticated spy submarine, Lieutenant Michael Chen stares at waveform patterns that shouldn't exist. The submarine is holding position in a narrow lead of open water, beneath 15 feet of surface ice. His commanding officer stands behind him, studying the same inexplicable data, and whispers, "Are you absolutely positive that's not just ice fracturing, Chen?" Michael doesn't answer immediately. His fingers adjust, filtering algorithms on specialized equipment that doesn't officially exist. His eyes remain fixed on the display. He's quiet, still processing. Then through the headphones, he hears it again. The unmistakable harmonic signature. Regular, engineered, impossible. Low-frequency vibrations traveling through the seafloor beneath them, too consistent to be geological, too complex to be natural. Michael removed one earphone and turns to Captain Reynolds. "Sir, that's not ice. That's a reactor cooling system. Whatever it is, it's massive, at least the size of Oak Ridge, and it's less than 15 miles from our current position." Inside the CIC, the navigation officer freezes over his charts. The weapons officer stops mid-report. The Exo's coffee sits forgotten as he absorbs the implications. "There can't be a nuclear facility here," Reynolds says flatly. "We're 200 miles inside the permanent ice pack. There's no recorded Soviet presence in this sector. Not even their icebreakers penetrate this far." But Michael Chen doesn't offer conjecture. He's already isolating frequency bands, mapping vibration patterns. Because this isn't just a contact, this is a puzzle. This is what happens when an MIT-trained acoustic engineer becomes a Navy sonar specialist and discovers something beneath the Arctic ice that challenges the entire strategic balance of the Cold War. They questioned him. They said it must be equipment malfunction until the patterns proved otherwise. And when the truth finally emerged, the Soviets weren't the only ones caught off guard. The analyst no one expected. Before he became the man who detected a secret Soviet nuclear city beneath the Arctic ice cap, Michael Chen was just another brilliant scientist reluctantly wearing a uniform. He wasn't imposing. He wasn't a natural military officer. He didn't grow up around submarines or even boats. He grew up analyzing patterns. His father was a structural engineer for Boeing. His mother taught mathematics at the University of Washington. And like so many specialists during the Cold War's tensest years, Michael was recruited into the United States Navy because his particular abilities were crucial to national security. He never imagined he would end up beneath the Arctic shelf, let alone making a discovery that would rewrite America's understanding of Soviet nuclear capabilities. Michael trained at the Naval Submarine School in Groton, where he was assigned to advanced sonar systems development. His instructors noted he had exceptional pattern recognition abilities, an intuitive understanding of acoustic propagation, abilities through varied media and a unique way of distinguishing artificial structures from natural formations that most operators missed. While others heard noise, Michael perceived geometry. He identified architectural signatures. He visualized from sound. Still, no one fully appreciated his approach. He wasn't aggressive enough. He wasn't decisive enough. And in a Navy where tactical thinking often mattered more than analytical depth, Michael stayed in the shadows until the technology evolved. By the time he was assigned to USS Poseidon in late 1979, the Cold War had reached a dangerous new phase. The Soviets were expanding their nuclear capabilities across new frontiers, and the Americans were pushing their intelligence gathering into regions once thought impenetrable, trying to maintain their strategic advantage as the balance of power shifted. But now came the hard part. Operating in environments for which there was no reference data, with limited understanding of how acoustic signatures might be altered by the extreme conditions of the high Arctic. That's where Michael's unique perspective came in. Nuclear submarine was America's ultimate Cold War intelligence platform. Vessels like the USS Poseidon could remain submerged for months, traveling beneath the polar ice cap, gathering acoustic intelligence, and monitoring Soviet activities in waters they thought secure from American surveillance. But submarines had problems, serious ones, when operating under ice. Navigation was treacherous, communication with command was intermittent at best, and if something went catastrophically wrong, the ice above prevented emergency surfacing, turning the submarine into a potential tomb for its crew. Still, submarines had advantages. They operated with near-perfect stealth in the Arctic environment. They collected data no satellite or aircraft could capture. But they required extraordinary sensory equipment, and they required specialists who could interpret what that equipment detected. That's where Michael Chen came in. After 3 years developing new sonar processing algorithms at Naval Research Laboratory, he was assigned to the Poseidon for a classified mission mapping Soviet underwater. These are an of the PO after the deaded, Deo, Forfti Surdham to Prest. Vikirwafas underwater, Nuafor, 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 Vikirwafas. Acoustic activity in the high Arctic, where intelligence suggested new submarine routes were being established beneath the permanent ice. The submarine commander was Captain James Reynolds, a stern cold warrior who didn't much care for scientists. Keep it simple, Reynolds would say. Detect, identify, report. But Michael was starting to think success wasn't going to come from standard procedures. It was going to come from understanding, from hearing what no one else could interpret, from seeing patterns where others saw only random noise. So one night, while analyzing acoustic data after a long watch, Michael brought it up. What if, he asked, we're missing structural signature because we're classifying them as geological events? The sonar department head, Lieutenant Commander Thomas Wilson, looked skeptical. You mean underground installations? In the Arctic? No, Michael said. I mean, what if the Soviets have found a way to establish facilities beneath the ice cap itself? What if there are acoustic signatures we're automatically disregarding as ice movement or seismic activity that actually represent large-scale engineered structures? Our classification algorithms are trained on open ocean data. They have no reference for human activity on this scale, in this environment. Captain Reynolds stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head. That's the most far-fetched theory. I've heard this patrol, he said, but Michael wasn't theorizing idly. He was already planning how to reprocess their acoustic data, rejection, isolation, and a pattern from the depths. At first, no one took Michael seriously. The idea of recalibrating sonar systems to detect engineering signatures beneath the permanent ice cap, of treating the Arctic seafloor as a potential building site, rather than desolate wilderness, seemed absurd to most of the submarine's officers. They called it academic overreach. They said he was treating submarine warfare like a research project, hearing patterns where there was only random noise. Lieutenant Commander Wilson, the sonar department head, made it clear, this isn't the kind of mission where you get to run speculative analysis. Lieutenant, you hear a Soviet Delta class, you report it, or we're all at risk. But Michael didn't back down. He kept analyzing, kept isolating unusual frequency bands, kept running comparative analyses in his personal logbook, cataloging patterns, mapping resonance signatures, cross-referencing with known structural designs. He studied the acoustic logs from previous Arctic missions, especially the notations about anomalous signatures that had been dismissed as equipment artifacts or environmental phenomena. These reports mentioned periodic vibrations that didn't match known submarine or surface vessel, profiles, energy patterns inconsistent with natural geothermal activity, and rhythmic sequences that suggested mechanical systems rather than geological processes. If he was going to understand what might exist beneath the ice, he had to create new classification parameters, new ways of filtering the overwhelming ambient noise of the Arctic environment. So he wrote specialized algorithms, designed new filtering protocols, analyzed the acoustic properties of different types of human structures to better distinguish them from natural formations. He looked for harmonic relationships, for patterns that emerged only when specific frequency bands were isolated. Still, no one supported his approach until one afternoon in early March. The submarine had been holding position in a rare Apollonie, an area of open water surrounded by ice, conducting extended acoustic surveillance. These positions were valuable finds, allowing the submarine to deploy its most sensitive arrays without the paraton interference created by direct contact with the ice above. The crew had been on mission for 2 months without surfacing. The psychological pressure of the environment was building. In the artificial world of the submarine, with no natural light and limited space, men grew irritable, impatient, increasingly focused on the countdown to mission completion. That day, routine maintenance on the towed sonar array had reduced their surveillance capability, creating a temporary gap in their data collection. That night, Michael made his move. He asked Wilson for permission to use the backup processing systems to reanalyze data from the previous week using his modified algorithms. Given the reduced operational tempo during array maintenance, Wilson grudgingly agreed. Michael worked through the midnight watch, applying his custom filters to the raw acoustic data. He isolated ultra-low frequency bands that standard processing ignored, applied resonance mapping, techniques developed for structural analysis, and began to see something extraordinary emerge from what had been classified as background noise. "Look at this harmonic progression," he showed Wilson, who had stopped by to check on his progress. "That's not a natural pattern. That's a mechanical system with regular duty cycles. And here, these are standing wave patterns, consistent with large engineered chambers." Wilson studied the displays, his expression shifting from skepticism to concern. "What exactly are you suggesting we're looking at?" "I think we're detecting the acoustic signature of a large underground facility," Michael said. "Based on the harmonic profile, it includes significant power generation, almost certainly nuclear. The scale is massive." Wilson left without further comment, but the next morning, Michael was summoned to the captain's stateroom. Reynolds, Wilson, and the XO were waiting, expressions grave. "Explain your analysis," Reynolds ordered without preamble. For the next hour, Michael walked them through his methodology, the patterns he'd identified, and the reasoning behind his conclusion that they were detecting a major Soviet installation beneath the ice, one that no intelligence assessment had ever suggested existed. "If you're right," the XO said slowly, "this represents a massive intelligence failure. We're talking about a facility that would have required years to construct, enormous resources to maintain, and a technological capability we didn't think the Soviets possessed." "I understand the implications," Michael replied, "but the acoustic evidence is consistent. Whatever this is, it's not natural, and it's not small." Reynolds made his decision. "We'll adjust our patrol route to investigate further, but this remains compartmentalized. No discussion outside this room until we have confirmation." For the next 3 days, the Poseidon navigated carefully through the treacherous under-ice environment, moving toward the source of the acoustic anomalies. As they approached, Michael's processing system began reporting increasingly detailed signatures, cooling systems, turbines, ventilation, the unmistakable low-frequency hum of a nuclear reactor. On the 4th day, at a position approximately 350 miles from the North Pole, they reached optimal surveillance distance. The submarine went to ultra-quiet operations, hovering in the water column as Michael deployed every acoustic sensor available. What they recorded over the next 18 hours left no room for doubt. Beneath the permanent ice cap, the Soviet Union had constructed what amounted to a small city, a nuclear research and production facility of unprecedented scale in an environment where no one had thought large-scale construction possible. The implications were staggering, not just a secret base, but an entire infrastructure that had somehow been developed without detection by American intelligence satellites, aircraft overflights, or previous submarine patrols. How? Reynolds asked during an emergency command conference. How do you build something this size without anyone noticing? Michael had been analyzing that very question. They used the ice as cover, he explained. Based on the acoustic profile, they likely began with a modest research station on the surface, similar to others we know about. But then they went down, not out. They've been excavating beneath the ice cap for years, using nuclear power for heat and electricity, creating an expandable facility that's virtually invisible from above. The submarine maintained surveillance for another 36 hours, collecting every scrap of acoustic data possible. They deployed specialized sensors that could detect radiation levels, electromagnetic emissions, even subtle changes in water chemistry that might reveal the facility's purpose. What emerged was a picture of a fully operational nuclear research and production complex, a Soviet equivalent to Los Alamos or Oak Ridge, but constructed in what should have been an impossible location. This changes the entire strategic balance, the XO said quietly. If they can build this, what else have we missed? The decision to break radio silence was not made lightly. Using extremely low-frequency communication, the only method reliable beneath the ice, Reynolds sent a brief, heavily encoded message to Naval Command. Critical intelligence. Require immediate extraction route for special cargo. The cryptic reply came 16 hours later. Proceeded furrows. To coordinates, Surface Protocol Alpha. The Poseidon began its careful journey to the designated extraction point, navigating through increasingly thin ice until they reached a region where they could safely surface through the frozen layer. What awaited them was unprecedented, a complete communications and extraction team deployed on the ice, having been flown in by specially modified aircraft after the submarine's message reached the highest levels of National Security Command. Michael's acoustic data, along with the submarine's complete surveillance record, was transferred to secure containers and immediately flown to Washington. Michael himself was ordered to accompany the material, an exceptional measure that reflected the extraordinary nature of their discovery. As he prepared to leave the submarine that had been his home for months, Captain Reynolds, who had once dismissed his theories, shook his hand with genuine respect. "Well, you heard what no one else could," he said simply. "Remember that, whatever happens next. What happened next would remain classified at the highest levels for decades. The woman who interpreted the impossible and the city beneath the ice." Word of the Arctic discovery spread through American intelligence circles faster than even the most efficient classified channels could control. Within days, analysts across multiple agencies were working around the clock to interpret the implications of what was being called Facility Iceworm. "Did you hear what the Poseidon found?" One Pentagon analyst whispered to another over secure phones. "A complete Soviet nuclear city under the ice. Powered plants, research labs, production facilities, all invisible from above." The rumors weren't exaggerated. The acoustic data Michael had collected, combined with subsequent intelligence gathering, revealed something extraordinary. A Soviet installation of unprecedented, puncedental, 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 scale and sophistication, constructed in an environment previously thought to render such development impossible. By the second week after the discovery, a specialized analysis team had been assembled at a secure facility. Outside Washington, Michael found himself working alongside the nation's top experts in nuclear intelligence, Arctic operations, and Soviet military capabilities. They worked in a windowless complex, surrounded by armed guards. Their findings reported ball directly to the highest levels of government. What emerged from their analysis was both fascinating and disturbing. The Soviets had apparently begun construction nearly 15 years earlier, using a scientific research station as cover for the initial phase. Using nuclear power for heat and excavation, they had gradually expanded downward and outward beneath the ice, creating a self-sustaining complex that included research laboratories, production facilities, and living quarters for an estimated population of over 300 specialists. The purpose of the facility, based on its acoustic and radiation signatures, appeared to be the development and limited production of advanced nuclear weapons designs that could be tested without detection by seismic monitoring or satellite surveillance. The implications for arms control, treaty verification, and the strategic balance between superpowers were profound. Michael worked continuously, sleeping only when exhaustion demanded it. His unique understanding of the acoustic data made him indispensable to the analysis team. He developed increasingly sophisticated models of the facility based on its sound profile, eventually creating a three-dimensional representation that astonished even seasoned intelligence officers. "It's not just a base," he explained during a briefing with senior defense officials. "It's an entirely new approach to classified infrastructure. By building beneath the permanent ice, they've created a facility that's naturally shielded from most forms of surveillance, thermally isolated, and virtually impervious to conventional attack." The naval intelligence officer coordinating the analysis remained skeptical. But the resource requirements would be enormous. How did they support construction on this scale without our noticing? Michael had been considering that very question. They used the ice itself as both shield and resource, he explained. The initial phase would have required significant material transport, but once they established basic infrastructure, they could create a nearly closed-loop system. Nuclear power provides virtually unlimited energy. Melted ice provides water. The excavated material from expansion was likely used for internal construction. The strategic implications grew clearer as analysis continued. Facility Icy Worm represented not just a technological achievement, but a fundamental challenge to American intelligence capabilities. If the Soviets could construct and operate a facility of this scale without detection, what else might exist in the vast Arctic wilderness? When the initial assessment was presented to the president, the response was immediate. A multi-agency task force was established with a single directive: determine the full extent of Soviet Arctic infrastructure and develop options for monitoring and, if necessary, neutralizing these facilities. Michael found himself in an unprecedented position. The acoustic engineer, who had once been marginalized for his unconventional thinking, was now regularly briefing admirals, agency directors, and cabinet members. His specialized knowledge had become critical to national security at the highest levels. Yet the pressure was immense. Each day brought new questions, new analyses to perform, new implications to consider. The fate of arms control agreements, military planning, and potentially the balance of power in the Cold War rested partly on his interpretations of acoustic data. During one particularly intense session with the National Security Advisor, Michael was asked the question that had been increasingly troubling senior leadership: could we have built something like this without the Soviets knowing? The question cut to the heart of the strategic implications. If the answer was no, then American technical capabilities had fallen behind in a critical area. If the answer was yes, then perhaps similar American facilities already existed or should be developed. Technically, yes, Michael answered carefully, but it would require a level of operational security beyond anything we've previously implemented. The excavation phase alone would create distinctive signatures that would be difficult, but not impossible to conceal. The briefing room fell silent as the implications settled. The Cold War had entered a new phase, one where the battlefield might extend to hidden cities beneath the ice caps at both poles. As spring approached and the Arctic ice began its seasonal shift, pressure mounted to gather more direct intelligence on Facility Ice Worm. satellite passes were increased over the region. Specialized aircraft flew dangerously close to Soviet airspace, carrying sensors designed to detect the minute traces of radiation or electromagnetic emissions that might reach the surface. And submarines, now equipped with enhanced versions of Michael's acoustic processing systems, patrolled the waters near the facility, gathering additional data on its operations and potentially searching for other similar installations. Through it all, Michael continued refining his analysis, developing increasingly precise models of the facility's internal structure based solely on its acoustic signature. His work became the foundation for one of the most classified intelligence assessments of the Cold War, a document so sensitive that fewer than 20 people were authorized to read it in its entirety. The report's conclusion was stark. The Soviet Union had achieved a significant strategic advantage through its Arctic engineering capabilities. Facility Icy Worm was likely not unique, but rather the first discovered example of a new approach to hardened nuclear infrastructure, one that bypassed traditional surveillance methods and could potentially allow for weapons development outside of established treaty frameworks. As summer approached, bringing the midnight sun to the Arctic, Michael found himself standing at the window of his temporary quarters, staring north toward the permanent ice cap that concealed a reality no one had imagined possible just months earlier. The man who heard through ice and the weight of knowledge, by now, Michael Chen was known throughout the intelligence community, not just as a sonar specialist, but as something else entirely, a decoder of hidden Soviet achievements, a thinker in a military environment that typically valued action over analysis. But behind every discovery, there's a cost. June brought increasing daylight to Washington, but Michael rarely saw the sun. The specialized analysis facility operated around the clock, with shifts of experts cycling through continuously. The fluorescent lighting never changed. The air conditioning maintained a constant, slightly too cool temperature. The classified nature of their work created a bubble, isolating them from the normal rhythms of the outside world. The facility was not designed for long-term occupancy. The furnishings were utilitarian. The food from the cafeteria, barely adequate. The opportunities for recreation limited to a small gym and a lounge with outdated magazines. The analysts and scientists, trained for technical challenges rather than extended confinement, showed signs of strain. Tempers flared over minor disagreements. Sleep patterns deteriorated. The constant pressure to extract meaning from limited data created a particular kind of exhaustion. Michael changed too. The discovery had transformed him. He no longer thought of himself primarily as a Navy officer or even a scientist. He had become something unprecedented, a civilian specialist suddenly thrust into a role where his interpretations directly influenced strategic planning at the highest levels of government. The weight of that responsibility altered him. What affected him most, what stayed with him, was the eerie similarity between his current environment and what he imagined life must be like in Facility Iceworm. The knowing, the moment between analysis and implication when he'd realized that the men and women in that Soviet facility were mirror images of his own team, technical specialists living in artificial environments, cut off from the natural world, devoted to classified work that few would ever acknowledge. He wrote in a journal he knew would be confiscated and secured. I don't know how to process what we've discovered. Every professional instinct tells me this is a triumph of acoustic analysis and intelligence gathering. But there's something profoundly disturbing about the image of humans constructing these artificial environments beneath the ice, these underground cities designed for work that cannot bear the light of day. Have we discovered their secret, or have we glimpsed our collective future? Admiral Harrison, who oversaw the analysis task force, stopped treating him as a junior officer. Senior CIA analysts sought his input on matters beyond acoustic intelligence. And Michael began carrying with him a small piece of Arctic ice core that had been retrieved during a subsequent mission near the facility, preserved in a clear acrylic cube, ancient air bubbles visible within its structure. He kept it on his desk during long analysis sessions. Something to remind me of the scales we're dealing with, he said, when asked about it. Thousands of years of Earth's history sitting right above a facility that could potentially end it. But even with the emotional burden, he never stopped refining his analysis. During one particularly intensive session examining new acoustic data from a submarine patrol, he identified subtle changes in the facility's operational patterns, shifts in power generation, modifications to cooling systems, new rhythms in what appeared to be manufacturing processes. "They're scaling up production," he reported to the task force leadership. "Based on the acoustic signature, they've moved from research to limited manufacturing of whatever they're developing there." The intelligence implications were immediate and alarming. If the Soviets were using facility Iceworm to produce nuclear weapons or components outside of known production facilities, verification of arms control agreements became virtually impossible. By now, National Security Council members had been fully briefed on the discovery. Competing imperatives emerged: the need to confront the Soviets about the facility versus the strategic advantage of letting them believe it remained undetected. The value of continued surveillance versus the risk that the facility's capabilities might dramatically alter the nuclear balance. When a dedicated satellite was finally repositioned to monitor the ice above the facility, analysts were shocked to discover how effectively the Soviets had concealed their presence. What appeared to be a modest research station, officially designated for meteorological and glaciological studies, showed no external signs of the vast complex beneath. Occasional supply deliveries by specialized aircraft seemed entirely consistent with legitimate scientific operations. The decision that emerged from weeks of high-level deliberations was complex and, to Michael, troubling. The facility's existence would not be directly acknowledged to the Soviets. Instead, a carefully orchestrated series of diplomatic and intelligence actions would signal American awareness without revealing the extent of that knowledge. Simultaneously, plans were developed for an American counterpart, a classified Arctic facility that would serve both as a monitoring station for Soviet activities and potentially as a platform for similar research and development programs. One evening, after a particularly intense planning session during which he had argued unsuccessfully for more direct diplomatic engagement, Michael found himself alone with Dr. Eleanor Winters, a senior nuclear physicist who had become something of a mentor to him during the long months of analysis. "You understand why we can't just confront them directly, don't you?" she asked gently. Michael looked at the detailed acoustic models spread across their workstation, three-dimensional representations of an underground city that officially didn't exist. "I understand the strategic reasoning," he said carefully, "but I'm concerned about the precedent. If both sides begin building these hidden facilities, developing weapons outside the framework of treaties, and verification, where does it end?" Winters studied him for a long moment. "What did you think your work in submarine acoustic intelligence was, for if not to discover exactly this kind of thing?" "Discovery is different from response," Michael replied. "Finding it was my job. Deciding what to do with that knowledge, that's where I worry we're making a mistake." Those concerns stayed with him through the following months, as he was gradually transitioned from the emergency task force to a permanent position within a newly established Arctic Intelligence Division. The facility that had been his temporary home became a long-term assignment. The analysis that had begun as an urgent response to a startling discovery evolved into an ongoing program monitoring not just facility Iceworm, but the entire Arctic region for signs of similar development. As the seasons changed outside his rarely seen window, Michael found himself becoming part of the very system he had questioned, helping design acoustic monitoring networks that could detect new Soviet facilities, assisting in the planning for America's own Arctic infrastructure, teaching other analysts to recognize the subtle signatures of underground construction beneath the permanent ice. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who had discovered one of the Cold War's most closely guarded secrets was now helping create new secrets, new hidden capabilities, new chapters in the escalating technological competition between superpowers. One afternoon in late autumn, as he reviewed plans for an advanced acoustic monitoring system to be deployed near the North Pole, Admiral Harrison stopped by his workstation. "You've been at this non-stop for almost a year," he observed. "When was the last time you took leave?" Michael tried to remember. The days and weeks had blurred together in the windowless analysis center. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "There's always been more work to do." Harrison nodded, thoughtfully. "The thing about secrets, Chen, is that they consume the people who keep them. Take some time. Go see your family. Remember there's a world outside these walls." The advice was well intended, but felt impossible to follow. How could he simply step away from knowledge of this magnitude? How could he pretend to engage in normal life while carrying the weight of what existed beneath the Arctic ice? But as winter approached again, bringing darkness to the northern latitudes where his discovery had changed the strategic landscape, Michael finally accepted that he needed distance, if not from the knowledge itself, then from the claustrophobic environment where that knowledge was contained. He requested leave for the Christmas holidays. When it was granted with surprising ease, he realized how concerned his superiors must have been about his mental state. He returned briefly to his family in Seattle, walking familiar streets that now seemed oddly unreal compared to the classified world he inhabited. His parents noticed the change in him, but knew better than to ask specific questions about his work. His father, who had security clearance from his own engineering work with defense contractors, simply said one evening, "Whatever it is you're carrying, remember it's not yours alone to bear." Those words stayed with Michael when he returned to Washington in January 1981. A new administration was hot at taking office. New strategic priorities were being established, and the knowledge he had helped uncover the secret Soviet city beneath the ice was becoming part of a larger transformation in how America approached the final decade of the Cold War. The man who changed the Arctic equation and the legacy of ice and steel. When the Arctic winter finally released its grip on the northern ice cap, allowing limited surveillance to resume, it revealed more than just the unchanging surface above facility iceworm. It revealed the ghosts of a discovery unannounced, acknowledged not through accusations or diplomatic confrontations, but through subtle shifts in military posture and resource allocation. Among those ghosts was the legacy of one reluctant naval officer, Michael Chen. He didn't alter strategy through dramatic revelations or public testimony. He had no military operation named after him, no official recognition of his contribution, no decoration presented at the White House. But what he did have was something far rarer, a mind that refused to accept that the Arctic was simply a frozen wasteland, that its ice was merely an obstacle, rather than a potential shield for unprecedented strategic development. The official reports never used terms like underground city or hidden nuclear facility. They referenced anomalous infrastructure, non-traditional deployment, subglacial installation of strategic significance. But the men and women who shaped American Arctic policy didn't care for language like that. They just said he taught us that the ice can hide more than we ever imagined. By mid-1981, Michael's acoustical analysis methods had been institutionalized across multiple intelligence agencies. Specialized submarine patrols regularly deployed his advanced processing algorithms. Satellites with enhanced capabilities were positioned to monitor the Arctic regions with unprecedented scrutiny. And yet Michael wasn't always directly involved in these operations. After establishing the fundamental analytical framework, he was increasingly pulled into strategic planning roles, helping shape America's response to the Soviet Arctic advantage. During one high-level planning session, a senior Pentagon official asked the question that had been carefully avoided in previous discussions: should we be developing our own subglacial facilities, not just for surveillance, but for the same research and production capabilities the Soviets have demonstrated? Michael's response was measured, but direct. From a purely technical perspective, yes, we could develop similar facilities, but I would strongly caution against treating the ice caps as a new frontier for military infrastructure. Once that process begins, verification becomes virtually impossible, and we risk creating an entirely new dimension of the arms race. The debate that followed established the fundamental parameters that would guide American Arctic policy for the remainder of the Cold War, a balanced approach that acknowledged the need for surveillance and limited infrastructure while avoiding the full-scale militarization of the polar regions. Michael eventually transferred from active naval service to a specialized civilian role within the intelligence community, working with a dedicated team focused on monitoring and understanding Soviet Arctic operations. When he arrived at the purpose-built facility in northern Alaska in the winter of '82, no one saluted, no one stood on military ceremony. A senior analyst simply handed him the latest acoustic data from underwater monitoring stations. Another offered him coffee against the penetrating cold. And that, Michael always said, was the proper way to approach consequential work. He never built a public career from his discovery, never gave interviews about Cold War intelligence, never wrote memoirs about his time beneath the Arctic ice. But if you visited his office at the classified monitoring station in the late 1980s, you might have noticed a strange artifact on his desk, a perfectly clear cube of ancient ice, preserved in acrylic, with a small Soviet coin embedded at its center. And if you'd asked about it, he'd smile and say, "That's how I learned that human ingenuity can create worlds beneath worlds, even in the most hostile environments." It's easy in hindsight to quantify the Cold War through statistics. Missiles deployed, warheads counted, defense budgets allocated, but stories like Michael Chen's remind us that the most consequential discoveries often remain classified. They're not about numbers, they're about perception, paradigm shifts. Quiet, calculated observations made by individuals no one notices until it's too late to ignore them. Michael didn't win through technology or military force. He won through a refusal to accept the obvious. He asked questions that nobody else had the background or courage to ask. What if the most forbidding environments on Earth aren't barriers but opportunities? What if our adversaries have seen possibilities where we saw only obstacles? What if the maps we've drawn of the strategic landscape are fundamentally incomplete? And in those questions lived the seed of everything that followed. Strategies revised, resources reallocated, and a new way of thinking born not from doctrine, but from the insight of an acoustic engineer with an unconventional perspective. Maybe that's the real legacy of people like him. Not the operations conducted or secrets uncovered, but the paradigms shifted without public knowledge, because one man decided to listen for what others had never thought to hear. But there was one operation that truly cemented Michael Chen's place in the classified history of the Cold War, an event that never appeared in newspapers or history books, yet fundamentally altered the final years of the superpower competition. It occurred in March 1983, as tensions between the United States and Soviet Union reached new heights. President Reagan had recently delivered his Evil Empire speech. The Soviets had shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007, and beneath the public rhetoric, intelligence agencies on both sides were engaged in an increasingly desperate scramble for advantage. Michael had been monitoring Facility Iceworm for 3 years, tracking its operations through an elaborate network of acoustic sensors deployed on the Arctic seafloor. What those sensors detected in early 1983 was deeply troubling, a significant increase in activity, new construction extending further beneath the ice, and acoustic signatures consistent with next-generation nuclear technologies. Most concerning was evidence suggesting the facility was now being used to develop and potentially deploy advanced submarine systems, vessels designed specifically for under-ice operations, with capabilities that could potentially neutralize America's acoustic advantage in the Arctic. The intelligence community's response was swift. A swift, specialized operation, codenamed Polar Shadow, was developed to gather more detailed information on these developments. Michael was recalled from Alaska to help plan what would become one of the most daring intelligence missions of the late Cold War. The operation centered around a modified Los Angeles-class submarine, specially equipped with advanced sensors and a small deployment chamber that could release autonomous monitoring devices through the ice above facility Icy Worm. These devices, cutting-edge technology for the time, would penetrate the ice and establish a permanent surveillance network directly over the Soviet complex. The risks were enormous. If detected, the submarine would be deep in Soviet-claimed waters, conducting what could only be classified as an act of espionage or even war. If the monitoring devices were discovered, they would provide irrefutable evidence of American knowledge of the facility, potentially forcing a public confrontation neither side wanted. Despite his civilian status, Michael insisted on accompanying the mission. His unique understanding of the facility's acoustic signature would be crucial for positioning the submarine precisely where the monitoring devices needed to be deployed. This isn't just about gathering intelligence, he argued during the final planning session. It's about establishing a deterrent. If they know we're watching, even if we never explicitly acknowledge it, it changes the strategic calculation. The submarine departed from a classified facility in northern Norway in late March, beginning the dangerous journey into the permanent ice pack. Michael found himself once again in the environment where his discovery had begun, the cramped, pressurized interior of a nuclear submarine operating beneath the Arctic ice. As they approached the coordinates above facility Iceworm, the submarine went to ultra-quiet operations, moving at minimum speed to avoid detection by Soviet acoustic sensors. Michael worked continuously in the sonar room, using his specialized knowledge to map the exact boundaries of the facility beneath them. What they discovered was even more extensive than intelligence had suggested. The Soviet complex had expanded dramatically, with new sections extending in multiple directions beneath the ice. Most significantly, they detected a large underwater access port, a sophisticated lock system that would allow submarine entry directly into the facility. They've created a complete submarine base beneath the ice cap, Michael reported to the mission commander. This isn't just a research and production facility anymore. It's a forward operating base for a new generation of Arctic warfare. The deployment of the monitoring devices proceeded with exacting precision, using specialized drills that melted through the ice rather than cutting it. Minimizing acoustic signatures, the submarine placed 12 sophisticated sensors in a pattern that would provide comprehensive coverage of the facility below. The devices were revolutionary, self-powering through temperature differentials, capable of transmitting data through the ice using low probability of intercept signals, designed to appear as natural ice formations if physically examined. They represented the cutting edge of American technical intelligence capabilities. As the submarine carefully withdrew from the area, Michael experienced a strange mix of emotions. Pride in the successful operation, concern about the implications of what they'd discovered, and an odd sense of connection to the Soviet personnel working in the hidden city below, unaware they were now under constant surveillance. What the monitoring network revealed over the following months would dramatically influence American strategic thinking. Facility Icy Worm was indeed developing a new class of Arctic submarine vessels designed to operate for extended periods beneath the permanent ice, potentially carrying advanced weapon systems that could evade traditional detection methods. More concerning still, the facility appeared to be serving as a testbed for technologies that could potentially neutralize America's nuclear deterrent. Advanced sonar systems that could track previously undetectable submarines, new propulsion methods that reduced acoustic signatures, and potentially weapons designed specifically for under-ice warfare. The intelligence gathered from Operation Polar Shadow fed directly into President Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, announced just days after the submarine returned. While publicly focused on space-based systems, the program included classified components specifically addressing the new Arctic threat. For Michael, the operation represented both validation and a profound responsibility. The monitoring system he helped deploy would continue providing intelligence for years, influencing strategic decisions at the highest levels without ever being publicly acknowledged. The authorities responded by establishing a permanent Arctic Strategic Assessment Office, with Michael as its civilian director. What had begun as an unexpected discovery by a sonar specialist was now a cornerstone of American Cold War strategy, a continuous monitoring operation that provided unprecedented insight into Soviet capabilities and intentions. In the years that followed, as Soviet resources became increasingly strained by the accelerating arms race, activity at Facility Iceworm began to change. The monitoring network detected gradual reductions in personnel, scaled back operations, and eventually signs that portions of the facility were being decommissioned. By 1989, As political changes swept through the Soviet Union and the Berlin Wall fell, the once bustling underground city had been reduced to a skeleton crew maintaining basic systems. The ambitious submarine development program had been abandoned, its prototypes likely scrapped or repurposed. What had once represented a significant Soviet strategic advantage had, through discovery and response, become another expensive liability for a system that could no longer sustain its imperial ambitions. As the Cold War wound down, people occasionally wondered what secret technologies and facilities might have existed beyond public knowledge. Most citizens never knew about the nuclear city beneath the Arctic ice, the monitoring network that had helped contain its threat, or how close humanity had come to establishing permanent militarized environments in one of Earth's last pristine wildernesses. But Michael knew, and in his quiet moments, reviewing data from the increasingly automated monitoring system, he would sometimes reflect on the strange symmetry of it all, how two superpowers had created mirror image worlds beneath the ice, each watching the other through technologies that would have seemed like science fiction just decades earlier. "We never actually fought the Cold War," he once told, a newly cleared analyst joining his team. "We built increasingly elaborate competitive infrastructure, waiting for a conflict that thankfully never came." That understanding, that the most dangerous confrontation in human history was largely conducted through construction rather than destruction, through hidden facilities rather than battlefield engagements, had profound implications for those granted access to the knowledge. It formed a more complex view of conflict and deterrence, a perspective shared among the small community of individuals aware of what existed beneath the great ice cap. The man who detected a nuclear city beneath the Arctic ice wasn't just an acoustic specialist with exceptional pattern recognition. He was a crucial link in a chain of intelligence that helped navigate the dangerous final years of the Cold War without catastrophic confrontation. When Michael Chen died in 2012, his obituary in technical journals mentioned his contributions to acoustic engineering, his theoretical papers on sound, propagation in extreme environments, his later work on non-military applications of pattern recognition technology. Only a small paragraph noted his service with the Navy and subsequent career in government consulting. But at his funeral, among the mourners were several distinguished men and women who stood with quiet dignity despite their advanced age or high positions. They placed beside his casket a simple glass cube containing a small piece of Arctic ice core, preserved perfectly over the decades. Those familiar with its significance understood it represented both discovery and restraint, the detection of a threat and the measured response that had helped prevent escalation. In the classified archives of Cold War intelligence, in the still active monitoring systems beneath the Arctic ice, in the strategic doctrine that continues to shape how nations approach potential hidden infrastructure. Michael Chen's influence remains credited as a pivotal figure in understanding how the world's most forbidding environments could become theaters for strategic competition. But perhaps his greatest legacy lives in what didn't happen: the conflicts avoided, the escalations prevented, the environmental catastrophes diverted, because knowledge, however secret, allowed for measured response rather than fearful overreaction. In the specialized training facility, where intelligence analysts still learn about acoustic monitoring techniques, a simple quote attributed to him appears on the wall. "Listen not just for what you expect to hear, but for what you've been trained to ignore." These words, pragmatic, insightful, revealing wisdom rather than simple technical skill, are the intellectual fingerprints of a man who heard what others had dismissed as impossible, who transformed a routine submarine patrol into a discovery that altered the strategic balance of the Cold War. They are the quiet testament of Michael Chen, the man who detected a nuclear city behind the ice wall and helped ensure it remained a secret rather than becoming a flashpoint. Long after the Cold War ended, when climate change began dramatically reducing Arctic ice cover, new questions emerged about what might be revealed as the permanent ice cap retreated. Remote sensing technologies detected anomalous structures beneath thinning ice in regions that had previously been inaccessible. In 2018, a Russian scientific expedition announced the discovery of an abandoned Soviet-era research facility that had been lost beneath the ice for decades. The carefully managed disclosure described a modest installation for meteorological and glaciological research, abandoned due to logistical challenges. But those with access to the still classified files knew they were witnessing the carefully choreographed revelation of a small portion of facility iceworm, a controlled acknowledgement of its existence as melting ice made continued secrecy impossible. What remains undisclosed, hidden beneath still stable ice, or perhaps deliberately destroyed during the facility's decommissioning, is the true scale of what once existed there, a complete underground city where Soviet scientists and military personnel lived and worked for years, developing technologies that might have changed the course of history had they been fully deployed. And somewhere in the Arctic depths, monitoring devices designed to last for decades continue their silent vigil, maintaining watch over a threat that has receded but not entirely disappeared. Persistent echoes of a time when humanity's greatest powers built hidden cities beneath the ice and prepared for wars they hoped would never come.